describes it, it says she creates meetings, exchanges and publications. So, but all about energy and the environment, and obviously with a very strong emphasis and expertise in China. So it's going to be very interesting to hear about that. And she's got a whole list of awards I saw on the internet, a very long list. Okay, she has a PhD in public policy and comparative politics from the Indiana University. So we welcome Jennifer. It was a unique idea, and we thank the US Embassy actually for thinking of it, Prasad, to have her come and give a presentation here. And welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was so happy I got a roving mic because it's hard for me to stay still. Yeah, so the Wilson Center is a foreign policy think tank, and as she noted that, I put on meetings, put out publications, but I'm also very much a matchmaker, bringing together government, NGO businesses, and researchers in China who focus on energy and environment, often with US experts, but with Europe, and with a project that we've been doing called Global Choke Point that's been doing in US, China, and India. I have this crazy idea that maybe we can also start linking up China and Indian experts. So let me tell you about Global Choke Point, which relates to my work. I studied water issues in China for my dissertation, looking at water management issues, and then when I came to DC and putting on my meetings, I did a lot on water, but clearly US-China relations and environment, energy, and climate was a big topic. And so I was tooling along, conversation about clean energy cooperation. And in the United States, because I pay attention to what's happening in the US, there was in 2007, there was a huge drought in the South. I have a good idea. There's a huge drought, but will the camera still see me? That's okay. We're good. All right. I love the high tech here. There was a huge drought in America's southeast, and in Florida, Georgia, and that region, and most of the coal and nuclear power plants there used fresh water for cooling, and about 25 of them got to the point where they almost had to be turned off. This was in 2007. And there were other kinds of water energy crises that were emerging around the same time that led to the US Department of Energy to create a research program called the Water Energy Nexus. And so this research was starting to look at how was energy impacting water. Well, I have some friends. Let me go back here for a second. Go back to this one. Oh, a pointer, okay. Circle of Blue. I have some friends. It's an NGO that was in Michigan created by journalists, and they do multimedia reporting on water issues around the globe. And after this coal nuclear challenge that happened in the southeast, they started thinking, and then in about 6 years ago, they actually started doing a project called Choke Point US. That was a big macro look at how's energy development impacting water. I mean, in the US on the left, that's my picture for coal. 45% of our water that's consumed goes to cooling coal and nuclear-fired power plants. 45. Not consumptive. It goes back into the rivers, but it still has to be there or the power gets shut off. Now, today, our coal sector is getting a lot smaller. A lot of the industry's being retired. There's regulations because of pollution, but also on the right there, it's a picture from Michigan of a shale gas well. The shale gas revolution, which, now, if it's done well, per megawatt, shale gas uses less water than coal-fired power plants. The challenge, though, with shale gas, because it wasn't very well regulated as it was emerging in the U.S., that a lot of this chemically treated water that would fracture the shale and brought back up was sometimes just kind of, like in this case, it was just put in a pool, allowed to evaporate, they threw plastic over it, and who knows what happened as it runs into the groundwater with these chemicals. So there's been a lot of debate in the U.S., and when they did their Choke Point US reporting, they talked about these various debates. They also looked at what was, and I think of particular interest to you here, about this kind of, particularly the water, energy, food confrontation in America's Midwest, in our grain heartland, where for well over a decade, the Congress has been subsidizing, they just stopped it, thankfully, maybe a year ago, water-intense biofuels, ethanol, which increased corn production, but took it out of the global market, but also created lots of polluted runoff from fertilizers and pesticides, the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, big red tide issues. But so we have crop growing in the Midwest with the biofuels, and then later on top of that, Canadian tar sand oil being brought into the US. There's debates about this now, but when you refine this oil, it needs lots of water. And then layered on top of that, you have the discovery of not only shale, but oil. In North Dakota, they produce more oil than Texas does. And so you have big problems of not only water use, but pollution in America's heartland. And so when I'm talking to you today about choke point, this is the kind of stuff, one thing I'm talking about, how energy impacts water and can cause problems, shortages, pollution. And the other big power, the power engine of the United States has been hydropower. Now, Western US has had a serious drought for the past 3-4 years. California in particular, the big red spot, you understand that here, there's no water. 2 weeks ago, the governor of California said his entire state, everyone must reduce their water by 25%. Now, luckily, the state is one of the few in America that has started doing water energy planning. And they will cope eventually, but it's very challenging right now. But in terms of energy production, California has had a 60% drop in hydropower. Agriculture, being pushed to be more efficient, prices might go up, we think. But in terms of hydropower, you guys know about Hoover Dam, which is like the model of dam building, and my Chinese friends who work at the Ministry of Water Resources say, this was our model. We follow the American hydropower model. Well, the Hoover Dam is in trouble. For the past 10 years, because of overtapping of the water and climate impacts, that the water level's going down. The bathtub ring gets bigger and bigger. And there's now discussions in the US that it's possible Hoover Dam may have to be turned off. Go to Las Vegas soon. It may not be the energy may not be there for it. So the flip side of choke point issues is how water is actually an energy intensive sector. This was some of the analysis both by the national labs, but Circle Blue looked into this as well. In the US, 13% of our electricity goes to cleaning, moving, and desalinating water. We're not doing as much desal, but California is starting to they're building them up now because the need is immediate. I actually got to go tour Chennai's desal plant last week, and it's the most energy efficient desalination plant in all of India and produces about 15% of Chennai's drinking water, but can, in times of emergency, maybe go up to 50%. But it's using electricity. California, 19% of their electricity goes to just all these kind of supplying and cleaning water. But you came to hear about China. I wanted to make sure you kind of got the concept that the US is facing water energy confrontations, and China, I've been doing work there, and after I read all this reporting by Circle Blue, I said, hey, we got to go to China and do this. And how Circle Blue works is they're an NGO created by journalists, and I used my network in China for them to go do interviews to ask one question. And as researchers here, you know that the best research projects have one really good question. The question we went to China asking was, how is energy impacting water? And the response was one answer, which was, I don't know. But then they gave us data, the Ministry of Water Resources, the energy experts, and we produced now about 25 multimedia stories, and I'm going to tell you some of those stories right now. You guys ready? You seem like it. All right. So, China, coal is clearly king. You might know that between 2000 and 2007, coal use doubled. It doubled again between 2007 and 2014. And for a long time, we've expected that it was going to double again by 2020, but the situation has been changing. Coal, not in the immediate future, but maybe dethroned. But the coal use has grown in great part, not only to fuel the industry, but to grow the cities. The cement and the steel that's needed to build, well, I'll tell you, this is the Beijing subway in 2007, this is 2013. They only put on, about 13 more lines. They're going to double the length of it. It's already the world's longest subway. It's going to get even bigger. Above ground, of course, you have the buildings. The building sector in every country, both the construction and use of buildings, can use somewhere around 40% of a country's electricity. But then add to that, here's the ring roads in China. Do we have any ring roads in Hyderabad? Yes. How many? 2, 1. China's working on 7, and I'm confident that someday there will be a ring road around Moscow from Beijing. Because, in China, and as I was talking in our little tea break beforehand, in terms of infrastructure, the Chinese do it fast, and they do it big. Small is not, we don't have that word in the Chinese language. So think about this though. This takes a lot of energy. The cement, and of course the cars are driving on it. And so you have these cities that are now that have been for a decade under a dome of pollution, but it's gotten much worse. As the growth has increased, the cars have increased. And this is after some time, I would love you guys to go home and Google Under the Dome. It was a documentary that was produced by this woman, Chai Jing, a former China Central Television broadcaster. She funded it with her own money. It's a TED-like talk that gives, better than me, a description of why the air is so polluted in China. And it became a huge public education end of February. 200 million people downloaded this documentary in about 2 days. And it started a national conversation on the Twitter equivalent in China. And so she talked about coal, about cars, about government corruption and inability to enforce laws, and also about how it's affecting people's health. There's a little cartoon of little ninja PM2.5s, and the stats are terrifying. Not only that in China, the Ministry of Health says 500,000 people die early. More health researchers say it's more like 1.2 million people die early in China from air pollution-related illness. But coal is not the only source of energy. China has been the #1 investor in clean energy for the past 5 years, beating out the United States. They've ramped up solar panels. They're #1 in terms of wind power. They've also built ultra-supercritical coal-fired power plants and energy efficiency initiatives. But when you look here at the pie charts, my apologies, I had to put one pie chart, is that you look at the energy mix. In 2010, about 70% of the electricity was from coal. Now in 2020, and I'm happy to say I'm going to have to remake this pie chart because the conversation has changed on coal. But they're still probably going to double their electricity use, and it still looks like that the wedge for coal is quite big. So the government is now having a war on pollution, and quite serious about punishing polluters, air action plan, local officials. You, sir, a local government official, you will now be accountable for meeting PM2.5 targets as of this year. And they actually, for the first time a couple months ago, published 8 out of 78 cities met the PM2.5 targets. Okay, what do you guys think? Good news or bad news? It's good news, because we know that 8 cities met and the other 70 didn't. In the past, the whole issue of information being used to pressure the government to feel bad is big. And of course, China last year signed an agreement with the US about peaking their coal consumption by 2030. Now they're saying, all the government and experts are saying, no, we're doing it sooner. The pollution is killing us.
PM2.5 monitoring mandate.
The PM2.5 monitoring mandate was that almost all major, large, and some of the medium cities, and just in China, small cities, 9 million, okay? So these are the mega cities. They have to have, they have multiple monitors. They have to be, a lot of them are continuous, and they're broadcast. The public is told, on the news and on the radio. There are now apps, plenty of apps that people can get. And that's how, they're keeping an eye on here's my local official here. They're keeping an eye on you. They know what you're doing. You failed so far, but at least we know.
So this is monitored through electronic means?
Electronic, yeah, it's very high tech. They bought a lot of US technology evidently to do most of this. And so, and it's notable, the Ministry of Environmental Protection has politically been very weak, but they've been working with the US EPA and international NGOs for years. And so when the order came, boom, hey, we have regulations right here for it. We have targets. And so the planning has gone quite quickly, and the pressure is great, but it's not just the top down. You have overall in China, the news media, besides Chai Jing's video, even before then, in 2010, one journalist, he gathered news stories about cancer villages and put it on a searchable map online. This is kind of common type stuff in the US for NGOs to do, and journalists, but this was revolutionary in China. The government had denied for years that cancer villages existed. 2 years ago, this map, because it also went viral online, the government admits there are cancer villages. A lot of this is from water pollution, and kind of scary. But I'm just giving you a quick view here. Bottom-up pressure from the environmental NGO community. This is Ma Jun. He's also a good guy for you to look up and read up on. His NGO, IDE, has created China's first online water pollution database using government data. He also has an air pollution one. And his work in kind of really putting out for the public and for the international community what specific factories are violating pollution laws, it's led to some he actually pressured Apple, and other international companies have been using his database to check out their own supply chains. And so it's quite exciting. But he also, just 2 weeks ago, that on the right, he created his own app called the Blue Sky app, which links to these monitors you were asking about. So you could be okay, you're in Tianjin, man. You click on your app, and you can find out, it links to the monitors in the city, and you find out just how horrible the air is you're breathing right now, real time. Another kind of pressure on the government to act, and again, a lot of this is on air pollution, but also sometimes, of course, water, is that you can now, in addition to public class action suits, new changes, public interest lawsuits. NGOs can bring these cases to court, and they're just starting to work their way through. Their protesting has been growing over the years on pollution, both on the streets and in social media. The business community has also not been silent. Jack Ma, who I've discovered people in India have heard of, the Alibaba head, this quote up, I just love this quote, it's just kind of cute anyway, but I put that up so you know that he funds Chinese NGOs to do work on environment, but he also, on his Alibaba website, he's encouraged Chinese public to buy his very inexpensive water testing kit. And he wants you to test your water, test the river water, and upload the information on a website. So we have China's top businessmen crowdsourcing water pollution information. Kind of crazy, but interesting. So while air pollution seems to be China's biggest problem, water is the biggest challenge to China. And I'm going to talk to you now about coal's water footprint, which through our work, we did multimedia reporting. We went back to China and told lots of stories about US and China choke point issues. And we've catalyzed new areas of research and started changing policy in China. And this is what we've talked about. North China, very dry. But all those dots there, those are these coal bases that have been expanding in China, particularly started ramping up about 5 years ago. Coal mines, coal-fired power plants, coal to liquids, right? They don't want to be dependent on importing oil from the Middle East. We can make our own gas from coal. Also coal to chemicals, and some of those chemicals used as fertilizers. I mean, coal ice cream could be nice, I don't know. But coal is big in China. But it's in northern China where there's not much water, and the coal supply chain needs lots of water. In Inner Mongolia, for example, mines as much coal as the whole United States, produces 26% of China's coal, but only has about 2% of their water resources. Overall, with the numbers that we got from different government and researchers in China, we calculated the whole supply chain in China for coal uses 20% of all the water used in the country. And when we went back to China and gave them this number, they all said, "Pagaola, that's too high. You're wrong, Dr. Wu." I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm just a foreigner who came in and took data you gave me. Why don't you look into it?" Ministry of Water Resources and Greenpeace China, Tsinghua University, and others have started looking at our research. They did some of their own, and depending on how you define it, but they basically came back and said, "You were right, Jennifer. Maybe it could be more like 15%, but when you look at how coal consumption has been growing until recently, coal is king and the king is thirsty, and with the amount of water that how exists in China and how it's being used in ag and the cities, they do not have enough water to support this. And so that the coal growth in North China really would put them at a real crisis level. And not just for coal, the amount of water, also, they use a lot of water for, and this one was a hard number, we had to estimate how much water is used to control the coal ash. And there's huge amounts of coal ponds everywhere in China, but they don't have enough water, so oftentimes, and they're not well made, so a lot of this kind of toxic water seeps into the groundwater, it dries up, it blows, people inhale it. Greenpeace actually did a report on this, and the Premier of China took notice, and they're trying to look into it, but it's coal ash piles at a scale the world has never seen. So what does China do? They don't have enough water. Well, back in 2001, China finally approved the South-North Water Transfer Project. This is the middle canal before it was done. And this is what it looks like now. The middle line is actually done. I have to update my slides. But they decided, Mao Zedong pondered this years ago, and now Chinese engineers, they all have a special tattoo, right? It says nothing's too big. China. Everything big and fast and strong. They're moving water from southern China to the north. The eastern and central lines are done. The eastern line, though, because water quality is so bad, they had to build 400 wastewater treatment plants, and even then, the cities that get it up north still have to keep treating it. So with the cement and the wastewater treatment, huge energy footprint that we don't really know how big it is, but it's quite significant. The western line, this is the one that I know that Indian audiences are quite concerned with. The idea that China would be diverting water out of the Tibetan water tower, right at the headwaters, is a scary prospect. Because, India wants, you guys want to do your own hydropower, right? And also just want to have the water. So, but this is going to take them 15, 20 years. It's blasting through mountains. And when we interviewed the chief engineer of this project, and we asked him, we said, sir, you're not really serious about doing this one. He said, we must, because there's a lot of coal in northwest China, and it's very clean coal. And so, this kind of story, in every country, energy tends to serve the water sector. And what happens to food, the ripple effect can be disastrous. This is in Inner Mongolia. This is a woman, her family used to subsistence agriculture, and they had animals. They don't have them anymore because their water disappeared. And in north central China, and you guys know this. This was a grain belt in China. A lot of corn, a lot of wheat, but the pressure on agriculture, because so much water was going away, not just to the coal industry, but pulp and paper, and just, agriculture in this area was starting to become untenable. And we talked to the Ministry of Water Resources, and they say, "Wen di bu da." Not a big problem. We're moving the grain belt. Right? So you've probably heard about the big investment that China has done in the Northeast into agriculture. And just for people, they didn't really move the farmers. They just moved the investment. So this is very much more high tech, using, China does lots of research on, seeds that are better in dry areas. And so we have seen in the last couple of years that corn production has grown in China. And in great part, this corn production is being driven by meat consumption. But there still are, with this movement here, it is a slightly more energy-intensive agriculture, and still, growing water pollution problems up there. And already water is a crisis. I think China is the only country I know of, where they use the term water pollution-induced scarcity. 30% of the water is at the lowest 3 levels of water quality by Chinese standards, and should not be come into human contact. But there's plenty of anecdotal evidence. We reported on farmers using industrial waste to irrigate their crops. When you don't have a lot of water, particularly in North China, you use what you have. 300 million people lack access to clean water. And one of the reasons, ag is now number 1 polluter of water, not just from runoff from pesticides and fertilizers, number 1 fertilizer user in the world, I believe, but also animal production. China has been, they're urbanizing their cities and they're urbanizing their pigs, as one of my USDA friends likes to tell me. Huge factory farms. And because local governments, you want to, meat production, this is good, but it uses a lot of electricity to treat this waste. And even wastewater treatment sometimes don't get turned on because given the choice between going to a factory or a wastewater treatment plant, the electricity goes to the factory. So something like only about 20% of the waste from factory farms tends to be treated, and the waste is like 3 times larger than that of an industry. And even this is focusing on pork, the chicken industry. And I've just learned that I just found out this morning that a lot of your corn goes to feed chickens in this country. Well, in China, the WWF is doing an analysis of their whole chicken supply chain and looking at the waste along the way. Not only is it, in terms of the waste that comes out of the chicken, but also they like to have chickens, they like to eat them when they're old. So they keep chickens it's supposedly healthier. And so they use a lot more feed to produce fewer chickens. But there's just a lot of waste along the whole supply chain, and some of that does pollute water. You may have heard that, the Yangtze River, another kind of water story that relates to coal as well, that in North China, the Yellow River in 1998 dried up and didn't make it to the ocean. Kind of a problem with it. It's like, for Americans, I say, Mississippi stopped at about just past Illinois. Would we get worried? Well, in China, the Ministry of Water Resources is quite powerful, and they mandated then every province a certain allocation of water. And suddenly the river started flowing again, a little trickle. But the challenge was, this started back in 1999. They allocated water and the river was flowing. But the economy is growing up there. The coal sector is growing, as I've already told you. And the coal bases come in and they say, well, we need water. Or the coal, steel plant comes in, we need water. And the provincial government says, no, I don't have it because my allocation is already out. So what we've seen in innovation that I think you people will be interested in is that some of the coal-fired power plants and industries have gone out to the farming communities and they said, look, we're gonna install good irrigation for you. Drip irrigation and cement canals, and we'll buy your water. Well, so the farmers win, they get water, their ag was getting a little better, but this is against Chinese law. You're not allowed to buy and trade water in China. But the Ministry of Water Resources decided, pilot project, because they struggle. Water is considered, ostensibly state-owned, open access resource. It's underpriced. But the water crisis in northern China is so great that there's creative thinking. And so actually the Yellow River, this is one of the good news stories we were able to tell about the energy-water nexus in China. If coal is king, hydropower is clearly the queen. 200 gigawatts of their power comes from hydropower today. They've got big goals for this because it's seen as a clean form of energy. Concerns about air pollution. So they cut back on hydropower production from 2005 to 2010 in terms of building big dams because of opposition. Back in 1994, Daiqing, a journalist, opposed the Three Gorges Dam, and she was put under house arrest. But in 2004, another journalist got a whole bunch of other journalists and NGOs to do reporting and highlight the proposed construction of dams on the Nujiang, the Salween River, one of China's last wild rivers. And the noise that they made led the premier to halt all, for that time, planning of the dams. But in the interim, more smaller dams are being, it's basically been death by 1,000 cuts of this river. So hydropower has been moving forward in China, in great part, so we have a lot of damming in the rivers, but we're diverting water out of them and polluting them. So the river ecosystem is very much at a tipping point. The Yangtze River, the fish ecosystems are collapsing. And so here's the big picture of China's water energy choke points. That a lot of their energy is coming from the western China. Coal in the northeast, hydropower in the northwest, southwest hydropower. But also in both these locations, there's exploration going on for shale gas, because there's a lot of shale gas pockets, more than we have in the United States in these areas. But then keep in mind, layer on top of this, lots of cities. Now these little lines that we have here, this is an interactive map we made on our website to try to look at how electricity, the export of electricity from the west to the east. Eastern China uses about 40% of China's electricity. And these are huge transmission lines. And that when they're completed by 2020, each of them will be the equivalent of 60 Hoover Dams. And again, China moving electricity, the government needs to keep the electricity going. It powers the economy, and the economic growth is really their foundation of legitimacy. So that's China. But now this is not necessarily sustainable. With the water constraints hitting their energy sector, there's new thinking. And I'm happy that our work on choke point has catalyzed. They're starting to regulate the coal sector's water consumption, and realizing that other people in China are doing the water energy research and thinking we need to come up with a different energy path. And so all these little logos, the one in the center that you can't really read, that little black and green one, that's for the Energy Resources Institute. It's the #1 energy think tank in China, and they partnered with the U.S. Energy Foundation to do a study. And these other groups have also done similar studies. If we don't do as much coal or hydro, what can we do? And again, you may think this sounds boring, but this is significant, where you have the top energy think tank in China saying, okay, how do we get off coal? Because the pollution problem is so extreme, the water constraints are growing day by day. And so they're looking more to gas, to ramping up the renewables even more, and most significantly, energy efficiency. There's still a lot more that can be done in that realm. And their plans, that you could look at all those great little pie charts, it still has some coal and some hydro, but not at the level that we're seeing projected today. So that was a quick version of China choke points. You guys ready for a few things on India? And I'm embarrassed because I'm in front of a room full of food people. So do note that we've only been doing the India work for 2 years. And so it's very much still at the macro. But we saw in India that the trends, what's happening is a little different. Even though in terms of energy development, India appears to be wanting to take the China heavy coal, heavy hydro path. But let's see where we are now. In terms of energy production, the US, between 1950 and 2010, I have my little dot thing here. 2010, right? We went from 35 to 95 quadrillion BTUs, 70 years. The Chinese did that in 15. And yeah, it was like, whoa. And a lot of that was coal. And the projections, now this may not be as high now because of, maybe as they shift, but they project that their energy needs are going to be 200 quadrillion. They want to double, right? Let's see if they can do it. But it's not whether or not they can do it, but how they do it, what it means for the air and the water. Now, India right now, your electricity production is about a quarter China's. And I know that, when Circle Blue interviewed Indian government officials, they were like, oh, we're just not doing it yet. But I look at this and say, there's still an opportunity. Because you have not yet locked into that full-on coal path. You're still growing your cities, not as fast as China, but you're on that direction. But you're already hitting your own dome of pollution. I was in Delhi, and everyone I met said, did you know we're more polluted than Beijing? I'm like, oh, great. But this is not yet coal, predominantly. From what I understand, a lot of it is cars. So, choke point India. The first story that leapt out at us was, of course, the question of free power and free water for the agricultural sector. And, it hasn't necessarily created the correct incentives for the farmers, but the farmers also don't always have. I was down in Chennai, and they told me, look, the farmers don't always get power. It's free, but they don't get it all day. So when they do get it, they flick on those pumps. And so the farmers don't have the benefit of doing maybe really, energy, water efficient agriculture. Again, this is very macro. And what I'm hoping, since I have you in the room, I'm going to have it on a webcast. We're coming back to India, and we want to dig, or shall I say, dive deeper into what's really going on with the water, food angle. But what we do know, though, is that 19% of India's electricity is going just to producing grain. And you have addressed the hunger problem, but not the nutrition problem, we've heard. But that's a lot of electricity, and that's a trend that's different from China. So your ag sector is driving some of your needs for electricity, but you're also losing about 1/3 of your power. Now, I was told in Calcutta, Delhi, said, no, our grids are getting better. We're not losing nearly as much. But that's still, that loss means that's loss of energy and loss of water. So your coal production is rising in the country, but your demand is rising faster. You cannot get it out of the ground as fast as the Chinese get it out of their ground. And some of it, we were told, it's bureaucratic obstacles. It's very difficult in Chhattisgarh, they said, to expand your coal mine. Evidently in India, there's sometimes some paperwork that needs to be done. You have to get approvals going way up and way down. But so because they can't expand these mines fast enough, India is importing 1/3 of the coal you use. Something like 2/3 of your energy is being imported. And when I was down in Pondicherry, I met with some environmental NGOs, and they showed me some maps that said, look at all the coal-fired power plants that are being built along the coast and the harbors to take the coal. And they were very concerned about the impact that's having on the coastlines. So, while you're not building coal-fired power plants as fast as China was 10 years ago, the ambition appears to be there. We also did some investigation into rat hole mining, also in the northeast, and found that it was highly polluting, dangerous for the people doing it. And we actually made a mini documentary about the rat hole mining called Broken Landscape. And as one of my Wilson Center colleagues and a filmmaker came, the day before they arrived, the National Green Tribunal banned rat hole mining. So it ended up being a slightly different documentary than we expected. It was more, talk about choke points and confrontation. they got to film the miners and the mining companies protesting against the National Green Tribunal, and then they also did interviews of the fishing communities about who's the water's toxic. And the reason that we wanted to do this was, and we're hoping to do similar stories in China, because we do so much macro, and we do tell stories on the ground, but to show that, the coal debate, we could do the same kind of story in West Virginia, where we take off the tops of mountains and mine coal. Circle Blue actually went to Australia and looked at how the growing coal exports to India and China are impacting agriculture there. And so, it's a global story, so this is a microcosm of a bigger story. Final couple slides, and then I'm going to open up. I want you guys to ask me hard questions. Maybe yell at me, who knows? India's had, starting back in Prime Minister Vajpayee, big goals and ambitions for hydropower, looking at the China model, which was looking to the US model. But, the Himalayan mountains don't always take too kindly to when you start putting up too many dams. In 2013, there was the big flood and some dams broke. I was up in Guwahati, and people were telling me, like, we don't want dams up here. We don't want the Chinese to be building dams, and we don't want dams here. And so with sometimes the technical difficulties and the opposition, the very successful opposition, that the hydropower goals you have at the current rate, it would take a century. If you keep moving as you are now. And so that's not really meeting the needs. Now there's talk, when I arrived last week, that Prime Minister Modi had an announcement about wanting to really ramp up renewable energy, particularly decentralized, just off-grid, big goals. And then I got to meet someone from an organization called Smart Power India. Again, part of my trip, I'm grateful the U.S. Embassy invited me to come and give talks, but I've also been trying to grab information from people about the stories of, what's the new path for India? What's another path that they might take? And this is a project that's being funded by Rockefeller Foundation, taking place in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. Have any of you heard of this project? It's what they're doing is that they're putting in renewable, solar PV panels in villages that have no grid. And usually when you have solar power, you have extra power. There's no grid to sell it to, so they've struck deals with the telecom companies because your cell towers. There's an expression in Chinese like bamboo shoots after the rain, right? You guys are getting really big, and I'm in Hyderabad. You guys aren't you the tech giants here? Everyone's getting smartphones in this country, and you need the towers. Well, it ends up, I didn't know this before last week, the towers are fueled often by diesel. Yeah, diesel's kind of polluting, right? Or it could be, lines. But so keep them off grid by using renewable power. So the plan is villagers would sell their excess renewable power to the cell phone towers, and then they make money. So it looks like win-win-win-win. I don't know, could be obstacles, and I was talking to some other people in Delhi who were saying that, we don't need the top-down Chinese government model of forcing renewable energy. We've got potential investors here, so there's a lot of talk about where India could go in terms of renewables. So we have more stories online. I just did a quick skim, but to close up, just to give you a sense that with Choke Point, we're the Wilson Center, we're a nonpartisan, non-advocacy organization. But by bringing together people in US, China, and now India, looking at these choke point issues, some things become apparent when you're looking at solutions. When you look at energy through the lens of water, it really says you need more water efficient energy, just hands down. Which can be, really energy efficiency is the most water efficient because you're using less, but off-grid type renewables and low energy water. I didn't give you a case study today, but in California, because there are water constraints, years ago, environmentalists are saying, yeah, we should take wastewater treatment plants and close the loop, have the wastewater turned into energy and they're off-grid. But those seem very expensive to install. But when your state has now have to decrease their water consumption by 25%, your cost-benefit calculation is changing. And if you really looked at the whole impact, you save energy by not turning on the wastewater treatment plant, but you look at the health impacts and ecosystem impacts of not treating your water, it becomes a much more efficient kind of solution. So waste to energy, renewable powered wastewater treatment. More Chinese are working now, going to be starting to work more with the U.S. on low energy desal plants. There's lots that can be done. And in doing this kind of work in the United States, water energy and what I call choke point research, they've been mapping out the water, what's the water footprint of different energy. We have their tools, there's different ways that cities are starting to assess water energy issues, what technologies are appropriate. And so these are the kinds of things that now we're starting to see the US and China are going to start a water energy program that the DOE said that I helped inspire. So I'm a happy person. Okay, you want to, and you guys, I mean, in some ways here, you're doing research and technologies that others take. I'm a policy think tank. I just kind of come up with like policy solutions, hopefully. So to wrap up, I hope that one of my big reasons here coming to India is to try to increase my mafia, choke point mafia. And I think that you people, a room full of food experts, I know that I could have a lot to learn from you. We have produced a water, energy, food roadmap that kind of summarizes our choke point reporting and has gathered lots of recommendations from experts in the field on what China could do. And these are our website. And thank you very much for listening so politely.
Open for questions.
And if you don't mind saying who you are when you ask questions. Oh, good. Sunshine. Hi.
Thank you very much for your very impressive and stimulating presentation. And you have given very different contrasts for India, US, and China. Excellent. So, do you have any to say something on best practices or policies that could be replicated to India from the experience of China or from the US? Because in India, subsidy and water and energy is highly subsidized, not reflecting the true cost of the production or the market price. So, in what way the Chinese or in the US, some of the best practices that could be replicated in India for management of energy, especially for development. That is one thing. Second, just to go this one, you said somewhere 45% of the water goes for cooling energy plants.
In the US, 45% of the water is in the eastern US. They're old coal-fired power plants and nuclear plants. Now, not all of our nuclear plants are on the sea, and so it's once through cooling. The water goes through and cools down. In China, most of their coal-fired power plants now are air-cooled, which are much more. I mean, they have ultra supercritical coal-fired plants. You guys only have. India is building ultra-critical, but yeah.
No, I read that by for this one, agriculture is the bulk user of water actually. But you said 45% of the water goes consumed. There is a contradiction. No, bulk of the water goes for agriculture, 85% globally as well as even this one. That is just one. Maybe afterwards I will ask.
Okay, well, on that last one, because the water that's cooling coal-fired power plants is only used and not consumed. A very small amount of that gets consumed, so it goes back in. And it's also that most of that is happening in the more water-rich east coast of the United States. So in some ways, but so the water does go back, and that water can be used for agriculture. So I know it's kind of, and if you want, I could send you so many PowerPoints and articles that the San Diego National Lab has done, because I know it's very confusing. I thought too, and I said, I thought we used most of it for ag. But again, it's a question of consumptive versus used. And in terms of the best practices, I mean, I think that, everyone that, Circle Blue and I have talked to here about the whole free water, free energy for ag, everyone's like, don't touch it. I'm like, well, so that's a tough nut. But the issue of, there's a lot of polluted water in India. Water quality is a huge problem. And whether or not there can be incentives created to encourage, industry and municipalities to do what we call the closed loop processing, where the wastewater is turned into energy. I have a number of talks when I was in Kolkata. I had the Indian Chamber of Commerce, and everyone was waving their arms around quite enthusiastically about biomass and biofuel, and I'm like, okay. We hadn't dug deep into those, and I'm guessing over lunch we could probably, I'd love to hear what I don't think it's quite as easy solution for any country, the biomass biofuel. I mean, I know there's a lot of research into low water biofuels and biomass issues, but in terms of, I mean, the challenge is, of course, you need to internalize the cost of the water. And that, I mean, in the US, a lot of our water still goes to the ag sector, but that's why, in some ways, what's happening in California, one of our big agricultural producer, what happens in California never stays in California. They really have driven a lot of environmental regulation in our country, and how they're going to extricate themselves from this water shortage. And some of it's going to be that they're going to ramp up their policies, pushing more efficiency. And we have to see what happens. And again, in the Midwest, which is also facing a water crisis in some part, all that energy production that's happening there. So then, while in the U.S. it doesn't, it never seems like we're at the same level of like environmental disaster looks, how it looks often in China in terms of pollution. But we're facing our own challenge. Also that by 2030, 2/3 of our energy infrastructure has to be retired. A lot of Americans are like, what? So the dams, the coal-fired power plants, the nuclear power plants, it's like, they're gone. So it might be good to have a plan. And so, and also a lot of people who are looking at water energy, like the national labs, are saying, this is our time. As we rebuild it, and the head of the DOE right now, the Secretary Moniz, he's totally on board with water energy. And so it's going to be a fascinating time. As we are rebuilding our energy infrastructure, we might be thinking about water, which will, at that point, starting to work with the Chinese, that's also continues to build up. India, it's a new way of looking at things. There's nothing as easy as it sounds with me giving a PowerPoint presentation here, but I think that there are some really intriguing opportunities. And the Chinese, the political willingness to try to deal with the energy issue, that's something that, hasn't maybe quite happened here in India, to be honest. I mean, that's my sense. But I'm repeating what I've heard in all my other 4 cities I visited. So, but yeah, time to be creative.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Maybe we'll collect 2 questions, and then you have to kick me in the shins when my answers get too long. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Srinivas. I'm also a natural resource economist looking at also water and energy nexus issues. I have 2 comments. One is regarding one of the solutions, the renewables, the solars, and the government of India is also piloting the concentrated solar power and solar thermal. And it's also one sector where water is also required. There is a conflict between when, for example, in most of the solar, the potential radiation is areas it's also water scarce, like Rajasthan or Anandpur and so on. So there's also a conflict between these 2 different.
We're doing the same thing in Arizona, by the way.
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah, that's one thing. And the second thing, which I feel is very important, is that so you've talked a lot about supply side efficiencies and policies which clean up the supply of energy. While what is important in this world is that where consumption is increasing, and if you look at the newspaper, people, the lifestyles are ever more important to actually the lifestyles approach to as a solution to the choke point, because it's a lot of it is demand driven also, and
exactly.
Of course if you see look at India, there's a big gap between supply and demand here, and the demands are increasing. If you look at the newspaper, you have all the real estate ads and big cars and
cement posters.
Yes.
Everywhere I go, these cement companies are hey, it's like China, like before 10 years ago when everything was booming, and I see it, and that's energy.
And I mean, do you think the policy focus only on the supply side efficiencies and is sufficient? Because I think a lot more has to focus more on the lifestyles and I don't know what kind of structures. For example, you mentioned a little on the California, the government has asked to reduce 25% of the people to reduce the consumption by 25%.
We got water police in California.
Yeah, I mean, pricing is one option, but there may be other solutions. I just would like to.
Okay. Should we gather one more question? I'll answer them together.
Hi, I'm Vincent, I'm a scientist here. I mean, the bottom line of all that is, in fact, that economic growth is driven by energy consumption. So,
Right.
when China sort of mess around to pollute everything, it's also driven by the need to have economic growth to get an increasing population out of poverty. Same story in India. No?
Yep.
So, I mean, all those think tanks that are sort of dealing with energy, I mean, are they also thinking of ways to dealing economic growth from energy consumption? Because otherwise, there's no. I mean, India is taking exactly the same path. So
Yep.
you come back in 50 years, you will be like in China today.
Yeah.
So I mean, why not putting a lot of thinking on delinking energy consumption from economic growth? I mean, all the, for example, the degrowth sort of movement. And there's a lot of work there. I mean,
Degrowth. Okay. Yeah, well, those, in some ways your questions are, they are linked. Yeah, and again, my time was short. I tried to cover 3 countries. So yeah, demand side, I mentioned energy efficiency, but demand side management clearly, to go back to your question, sir, too, that's one of the best practices. And we have seen, like, California has been partnering with Jiangsu province in China, another big economic powerhouse, and creating demand side management pilot projects, focusing a lot on industry, because industry uses 70% of China's electricity. That's a lot. So in the U.S., it's almost flipped. It's the consumers. We're the big energy hogs because all of our industry went to China, right? But so reducing, finding, both with pricing, but also technologies, and don't forget the fact that the water sector is, I think in China, the water sector is a high energy intensive sector, and trying to get that recognized in China will be really important. So while it sounds really small, but there's if you don't know them. The Pacific Institute in California, it's our top water think tank. And they've been working with cities in California, looking at not just industry, but also particularly consumers, how, the idea of linking here energy efficiency with water efficiency, and also water efficient, everything from the showers and toilets, but also the same thing for industry that in the United States, now we're seeing with our water problems, U.S. and every country we have to be the most energy and water efficient. And so maybe it's not like degrowth, but it's a different kind of growth. Because some people are saying like, hey, we could make money selling this kind of stuff. But efficiency it should be the mantra for all of this. Yeah. So maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah. I'm Cynthia Martinez. I'm the Program Director for Markets, Institutions, and Policies here at KSIConnect. In figuring out the water energy policies and planning process, I'm really interested in seeing how centers, research institutes like KSIConnect and the whole CGIAR have a role to play in this partnership. It's a global partnership.
Exactly.
And so I got to understand from your talk that it's really essential to understand the water, energy, food roadmap. We call it a roadmap, which you have actually illustrated for various countries. And this is going on for many other countries, right? So I'd like to particularly just find out in what way it's been expanding. And of particular interest is also the subsidies. And the subsidies are on the urban consumers, which is driving this.
Yeah, so those kind of 2 questions. In terms of choke point, like we Circle Blue did U.S. first, and then I partnered with them to do China, but then also we've continued. I worked with them, pointing out some U.S. stories. We're actually next month I go to China to Shenzhen. We're doing a choke point port cities project where we're going to look at we did a couple cities in China already, but now we're looking at in a bigger way. Shenzhen, right across from Hong Kong, a big economic powerhouse. We're going to do an assessment of the city's water and energy footprint and how it's linked to pollution. And if possible, the food piece, is a little tougher, but also, as a side note, do you ever kind of think when you go to these giant cities about just how miraculous it is that there's food in the cities? Sorry, I'm always, when I look at Chinese, I'm like, we have so much food. But anyway, that's another conversation. But so we're going to do the water energy footprint of Shenzhen and also Oakland, California. Because I mean, and the reason we picked Oakland, because I know like size-wise, it's nothing this big, but Oakland, because it's in the heart of a state in water crisis, looking at how that city has been trying to become innovative in trying to deal with their water energy challenges, and then doing exchanges. We have done some exchanges. We created a China water energy team, China Wet, where we brought 5 U.S. water energy experts and then with counterparts we were in Beijing, and we went, and this was in 2013, where we went around and gave talks, because a lot of the people we inspired in Greenpeace and the Ministry of Water Resources, we took them on a little speaking tour to the right places in the government, so they could hear both from their own experts and our experts about how, hey, water energy is kind of important. And we want to do more of those kinds of exchanges, because again, we started off at the big high level, and now we want to do it at cities. And when I was in Chennai, the Chennai city official said, "You need choke point Chennai." I'm like, okay. Calcutta said, but clearly for as we move forward, now that we get the macro snapshots, and again, we do it through telling stories. And hopefully you'll go look at our website, that we feel that, white papers from think tanks a lot of times, they're boring, right? But partnering with journalists, I've discovered, and other projects at the Wilson Center have discovered, it's a way to make a more compelling case to identify the challenges, which then, of course, will produce important, there are white papers that are important, but to kind of hook the interest and help people understand a very complex issue, we're using this method. We're actually going to be doing choke point U.S.-Mexico border, looking at that, and so, we're a 501c3, so it often depends, who funds my work. But the China work, because that's my second home, we want to keep doing it. And China's in some ways very much it's kind of like the model, how we want to move forward, taking it, handing over the choke point kind of analysis and discussions to local partners. And, we have big aspirations to see, can we come to India and catalyze conversations? Because the problems in India, the dynamics are different, but the solutions will also demand different responses. But I really do think, though, that what's happening in the U.S. and China, how they're, again, it's in process, dealing with these choke points, some of it could offer useful models for India. And if I could be a good matchmaker with that, I'll be an even happier person.
Okay, I think that'll have to be our last question, Madhu, but remember that Jennifer is around all day, so if you want to, you could line up to meet with her. So, last question.
Yeah, I'm Madhusudan Bhattrai, economist. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
One question about the solar energy, in China, US, how cost effective? There's a debate in India now about the cost effectiveness versus the technological feasibility. So any information that you want to share? There's a debate going on now in public policy. Is technically feasible in terms of use in agriculture? So what is the best rate or something best practice in China or US, other places also?
Yeah, well, I mean, a happy story in the U.S. Is that, that actually, despite the shale gas revolution, renewables are growing. Some of that is, some of the realization is that, hey, this is actually, it can be a job creator. Not necessarily, a lot of times we're still using the Chinese-made solar PV panels, but actually the installing and maintaining of them creates even more jobs. So, so some states have been very progressive in seeing that this is a way to promote jobs. I mean, solar in terms of, you can, obviously in some, the issue of feed-in tariffs sometimes causes concern, but at the same time, there are plenty of groups that have done analysis of how much, for example, in the US, with tax breaks that we give the oil and gas industry, that maybe, maybe that there's not been a level playing field, and so there's growing pressure for that to stop. And in China too, I mean, the coal industry has come under more pressure to not be, again, because of the pollution problem, they're kind of being subsidized, they still, they're still king. But in terms of renewables, and I think that, you guys have heard the news that like Tesla, that the question of having the technology to store solar and wind power, that's the kind of breakthrough that, that people cry with happiness, right? Because that could be the game changer for solar, and also with solar, with all the solar and wind, the pairing of gas. That there are a lot of organizations, all those logos I had up before, where they're looking at, gas and renewables. They meld together very nicely. You know, because gas you can turn on and off a lot easier. Coal-fired power plants, they don't take kindly to ramping up and ramping down. It's very inefficient. So I think that, you know, there's cost effectiveness and effectiveness of use. And again, and I know I said it, but I can't emphasize enough, the pollution and water challenges around coal in China, the thinking is shifting. And then that's the kind of, you know, when you have the world's largest energy consumer changing their thinking, you know, it's a laboratory for experiments. And yeah, we could get some lessons there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. It was very engaging talk, and I think there'll be would have had a lot more questions if we could have allowed it. So everyone can just thank Jennifer one more time.
Thank you so much. And they're going to try my mic. I got one.